Good afternoon and good evening, friends and colleagues. Welcome to this conversation today on conversion therapy. My name is Tahil Sharma. My pronouns are he and they. And I serve as the Faith Work Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force, as well as the Program Director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. We are here to have a really different conversation than I think the center tends to have and that the task force tends to have, because we've previously done a series of working on conversations related to faith and the LGBTQ community. For those that are interested, they can visit the YouTube channel for the Interfaith Center to check out some of the events that we've done that are very policy oriented, that are very theologically oriented sometimes. But today we want to have a specific conversation about the existing idea of what we call conversion therapy. We are not here to talk about a definition of it. We are here to talk about the direct experience of people who have gone through the process. So we want to make this very clear that this is a space that affirms the experiences and affirms the dignity of the people who have experienced conversion therapy. And why what we are here to talk about is how we support communities through that process of not getting them involved with conversion therapy, and to actually talk about how that is an active conversation in faith spaces and political spaces today. Um, what's important for us to talk about is uh, the realities of how this has impacted, cases that have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court in the United States. Particularly, some of you may have heard about the decision that was made on March 31st of this year in the Childs versus Salazar case, which was a case that came up in the state of Colorado in their intent to ban conversion therapy for minors, and that the court, with a decision of 8 in favor and 1 against, decided that that was a violation of the First Amendment of the therapist and how they were presenting their form of conversion therapy. Um, this is actually a very scary situation to see that the court justified something like this, because we know that the impact of conversion therapy is very real. We also know that it does not look like one specific version or form that can impact an individual or an entire community, such as the LGBTQ community. So we want to be very intentional that this conversation is to help learn, to help understand, and to help advocate for people who may get caught in that cycle. We know that recently, even the Catholic Church has been having conversations about the harm of conversion therapy. So this is also a very relevant topic for us to be in discussion today. But there's a reason why I'm very excited that we are able to center some important voices in the conversation that I'm going to pin right now as we are talking. Um, and where did my colleague Gemma go? But I am very excited to be able to center three voices in particular who have contributed to a very important collection of stories that can help us really learn about the the experience, that can help us really engage with our understanding from the perspective of folks who have been victims of conversion therapy, but more importantly, to see how we can better show up for communities and people that are impacted by the work. So I'm very excited to have Lucas Wilson, Nathan Shea, and Gemma Hickey here as a part of this conversation today. I am very thankful that you all were willing to be a part of this conversation. Um, and understand that this may be at some points a bit difficult to talk about in such a public manner. But I want to show my gratitude from our organizations and from communities here who are really invested in seeing what they can do better to show up for folks. So thank you so much for agreeing to be in this conversation today. And I'd like to start with posing an initial question to you, Lucas. You are the main editor and compiler of these 19 stories in a book called Shame, Sex, Attraction. And I just want to go into, you know, ask that question of what made you start this project? What made you want to bring people's stories together in this way?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having us. I speak for Gemma and Nathan. I think that we are very excited to be here. Again, thank you for this opportunity, this invitation. Um, so the way that the collection initially came about was from it was a message on the artist formerly known as Twitter, X. I got a message from an editor, and they said that they had been following my public facing work on conversion therapy. And they asked if I might be interested in putting a collection together. And I, of course, thought this was a scam. I thought there's no way in Dodge that they're asking me for to do this. And so I looked them up. Sure enough, the press and the editor were real, legitimate. And so we negotiated. My only negotiation or sort of item I brought to the table that I was insistent upon was that I did not want any any fictional accounts of conversion therapy. I wanted to center the voices of those who have undergone conversion therapy. I didn't want, imaginative representations of these practices. And thank goodness the press agreed and they said, yep, that's what we want as well. And so I went forth and, solicited submissions from folks in my communities, and then asking other folks to help with this. But for me, when I think about the importance of this collection, I mean, I come from an academic background, and research has been my life for the past 10-ish, well, 10 plus years. And with that being said, I think research is important. I think research, undergirds a lot of sort of cultural and social shifts, but it's oftentimes, quite delayed. We don't necessarily hear about the theorists and the researchers and the thinkers until, a few years later. But what we do hear about are the artists and the creatives and the folks who are out there telling stories, whether it be through word or image or sound. And I think that for me, this collection was super important because although I do think that folks' minds can be changed about conversion therapy and that folks can understand the harms of conversion therapy by way of research, I think what is ultimately a more effective and affective, right? That something that stirs up emotions way of doing this is really by way of storytelling. And so this collection is not just one story. It's of course, it's a collection of stories. It's 17 stories in total, plus the story. Also, Gary Conley wrote the foreword, and all of these stories together, I think, are wildly powerful. I think that they show the range of conversion practices. That it's not just one thing. It's not just a pastor's office or some sort of crackpot theorist or a therapist, but there are many folks who practice conversion therapy, and sometimes unbeknownst to them, right, that they don't even necessarily realize what they're doing, or the harms that they're causing to folks that they're subjecting to these practices. And so that's why I think this collection is important and why I ultimately decided to do it.
No, I think that's really great, and I think there is such an important value to that point that you're making about storytelling, right? It's as painful as the experiences can be of sharing some of these stories, knowing that folks are putting themselves in very vulnerable positions, such as yourselves, to be able to share that means so much. And I think it comes at a time where it becomes challenging to be able to also understand that the story doesn't look the same, that the people who experience the story doesn't look the same. Um, and we want to be able to make people understand that this is not a question of a single faith tradition or a singular identity of gender and sexuality. Conversion therapy is all-encompassing in so many different ways, and the fact that you were able to get a collection of those stories is helpful for us to be able to, put that into the spotlight in such a unique way. So we really appreciate that. But quickly, I want to just pass it over to our other guests to be able to talk a little bit about their stories of what they experienced, and how they've been able to navigate that as a way to be able to not just share a story, but to advocate for the justice of, folks from the LGBTQ community as well. So, Nathan, Gemma, whoever would like to start first.
Nathan can go ahead if that's fine. I don't need to
Oh,
go next. whatever, if you'd
Okay,
like.
I can go. How should I frame this? I guess I submitted to Lucas's collection anthology, and I think I my story is a little bit different from a lot of folks, as I don't come from an Abrahamic background.
Mm.
My mother was part of a faith that a lot of people call a cult called Falun Gong, and it has this front-facing, and I think the most um how would I put it? The most public organization of this faith is called Shen Yun, which you might have seen in billboards around various cities across countries in the world. And the only place you won't find those billboards is in China, funny enough, even though its slogan is China before communism. And there's a lot to dig into there, but I don't think we quite have the time here. I think suffice to say it's a very homophobic and oppressive organization, and I was in Shenyun for 8 years. And when I first saw Lucas's call for this anthology, I was like, oh, I haven't been through something exactly called um, conversion therapy, but I had for all my life been um, forced to change who I was by Shenyun and then also by my parents. And I was only, I think, when I finally submitted, when Lucas was like, I am interested in reading this story that you have, and which would be the only nonfiction piece I'll ever write about my own life ever. I think I'd like to keep it that way. Is that as I was writing this, after I submitted it, after it got published, after Lucas worked on it with me, which was an amazing experience, I began to, I think, better understand as I was reading the collection how my story related to the other contributors was that there is an institutionalization of a homophobia essentially, transphobia and queerphobia in general, and that it is happening at higher levels of law than I even was able to recognize at the time. For me, it was so much of the abuse of the psychological trauma was happening like between my parents, between people that I could put names to and faces that I could recognize. And I was beginning to understand that it was happening across the country systemically. And I think, and since that anthology has come out, I have joined in like a lawsuit against Shenyun that we hope will become a class action lawsuit. And I think I've learned a lot more about how these institutions work. I think there is a sort of similar line about how I would say power often coalesces around um, ostracizing and alienating and forcing people of a certain minority to change, to adapt to what is in power. And and I think I feel really lucky that I know so many people and can continue to contribute to, I think, and see all these different, I would say, battles that are happening across America and beyond these borders to um, really change um, to really reckon with that power that is at hand and to make things better for all of us, queer people specifically in this context. Um, I do not know if I answered your question, but I will pass it off to Gemma now.
Thank you so much, Nathan and Luke and everyone here. It's great to take part in these types of events because it's just nice to know you're not alone, and I think that sums up what my experience was going through conversion therapy. Growing up in an Irish Roman Catholic family, I mean, I thought I was sick. I thought I was evil because I was having these feelings. And I talked to a priest who ended up sexually abusing me, who was pushing me towards conversion therapy. I talked to a doctor who introduced me or referred me to the conversion therapist. And from there, I had treatment with her, and it was praying and reading all kinds of material that was, I guess, trying to alter the course of my well, my brain, the grooves in my brain or whatever. But it was very harmful and isolating, and it resulted in me almost ending my life. And ironically, the one of the other victims of this priest was the conversion therapist's daughter that I found out later when I did come forward about that. And when I had named the priest publicly in 2021, finally, though I did try to have him removed, and he was removed for a time when I was younger, they put him back into a church, gave him two churches actually. Um, Later on, when I named him, through that whole process, I had access to a number of files where I was able to see various things that supported my claims. And many of them were letters written by my conversion therapist to the Archbishop, saying that this priest needs to be removed from the altar, you know? So it was like interesting that um, this woman had done so much harm to me, not thinking that she was harming me, but helping me, and then was trying to help me later in life, and I had no idea. And it's kind of a weird kind of full circle moment in a way. But um, ultimately, I had to stay in hospital for part of my senior year, and they let me go when I finally told the psychiatrist that I was having feelings of for a girl, and they were like, "There's nothing wrong with you. You can go home." And that was the first time that I had heard an adult affirm me in that way. And I think because he was a because he was a psychiatrist, and there was a psychologist there on the ward and nurses, and there was a nurse there that was a lesbian, and everyone seemed, whoa, cool, you know. And I was like, hey, maybe this is not so bad. Maybe gay people aren't so evil after all. Maybe I can be this, you know. And so I got out, and I decided at that point, I made this, you know, vow to myself that I would do whatever I could to ensure that a young person never had to go through what I had to go through. And I ended up devoting the better part of my life, 3 decades, to advocacy, throwing myself into movements that would, um, I guess, gain more societal acceptance of us on a whole kind of a, well, same-sex marriage was one of the things that I devoted my time to, you know, working in ending the blood ban for gay men, adoption, a bunch of different things, eventually gender neutral identification, but you know, primarily to kind of build on what's been done before, but also so that people could understand that, you know, as much as we're different, we're the same, and we want rights, and we deserve rights, and these types of things. And then I used every opportunity I could to talk about conversion therapy, you know, whether that was an interview or when I'd go give a talk. And then slowly but surely, someone would get in touch with me who went through the same thing. No one believed me that it existed. I'm going on 50 now, and back then I was a teenager, and no one believed me in the 90s that this was happening, you know? So there was that, you know, the invisibility of it all, and no political will. So being involved in these wider movements really helped me form a community from growing up like on an island on the east coast of Canada, Newfoundland. You know, I love this place, but again, it is not attached to mainland Canada, and there weren't many resources around. In fact, I ended up developing a lot of those resources because there was nothing here in the city, not like on, you know, in Toronto, Montreal, or bigger places. And anyhow, you know, being a part of a wider movement really gave me that sense of belonging. It gave me access to resources, to networking, and that network got larger and larger as I was doing more talks and interviews and found other survivors like me. And and so that's what made me an advocate, conversion therapy. And you know, it's interesting to be, you know, well, I didn't think I was going to live, you know, I didn't think I was going to live. And here I am now, almost 50, and I've been a part of many different things. And, you know, I'm a writer, and writing has always been my way of expressing myself and working through trauma and pain and these types of things. And, you know, so when Luke had approached me and we were connecting about being included in this book, then it was really an incredible experience, because I made new friends, but also, again, I was expanding that kind of sense of community, but also just another outlet to be able to express it. And I think it's really important. I grew up in a family of storytellers, and that's kind of a thing here in Newfoundland, where we're storytellers, and I think it's really important that these types of stories get out because, for so long there's been such invisibility imposed on our community, and we're having to live our history and create that sense of like, well, that historical record by telling our stories and sharing our stories. And that's why books like these are so important, and why brave people are braving even more marginalization by coming forward and putting themselves out there. But again, it's necessary to do. So I'm just so grateful for being included in this collection. It's an excellent collection, and so proud to be among such resilient people and great writers. And again, thank you for having us here tonight. And I look forward to other questions. I hope I answered the question, but I think so. But anyway, we still have some more time.
We absolutely have more time, and more importantly, you are answering the questions as you are finding it, making sense to you, but it's giving us so much more of um the understanding of your resilience, while certainly no one needs to build resilience on such horrendous experiences. They shouldn't have them in the first place, and yet you are showing us what it means to advocate for people that you want to make sure never go through this. Especially when, kids, teenagers, and even adults have the possibility of getting exposed to these kinds of practices, and could certainly put into harm's way, whether it's to themselves or to other people. So we really appreciate the answers that you're giving. And I actually want to, begin to dig a little deeper a bit into some of the connections here that are coming up with just the name of the book alone, shame, sex, attraction.
Hmm.
Shame is a very big part of why there's a lot of enforcement on changing the ways that people view their gender and sexuality because it does not meet the intentions of a binary. And I am curious from each of you, like how was that shame forced upon you in your unique context? And Lucas, particularly, from the perspective of an editor, what were some through lines that you noticed of all of the folks who contributed to this anthology? Because I wonder if there are some ways that we can sort of push back against that shame, knowing full and well that it ultimately comes from a lot of family experiences where that shame starts and how it extends into community norms, religious implications, and then, ultimately how people societally may want to continue to push a specific agenda. So I'm kind of curious from each of you, how did that shame show up exactly?
Would someone else like to take that? Is that
I
Luke's
feel
question?
like Lucas should go last for
Yeah.
this one,
So,
actually. That would be interesting. I can go, well, okay, I can go first so we don't. So there's a bit of um for me, shame, as Tahil mentioned it definitely started in the family, but specifically actually with my dad, I would say, and that he noticed from a young age that I was not quite as masculine as he would like. Like I was very innocuous at first. Like I was like, I don't want to play basketball. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Like I just want to stay home and read. And he's like, okay. Um, but after I joined Shen Yun, I think it became a lot more overt. As I hit puberty and I was with a lot of other young men, and they started to notice that I was like that I would talk in a specific. I had a faux accent. I still have one. Um, and they would ask me to talk differently. They would ask me to even walk differently. They were starting to perceive things that I don't even think make any sense. Like I don't think there's a gay walk, but I was convinced when I was in high school that I had like a gay walk, which makes no sense. And then once I finally left Shenyang when I was 22, and my parents discovered I was gay, I had a awful, terrible coming out situation that if you have a chance to read the collection, you'll get to read more about, for better or worse. And that's when I think a lot of larger cultural aspects came in, this desire to um, basically generate progeny and like have a next generation of children, which was important for my family because I was the only son in my family's generation. It was very they framed a lot of this homophobia and like as like this is the tradition. Like we've only men have always married women. It's just always been this way. And I felt shame almost in a secondhand way because I would see how much shame I was bringing upon everyone else around me. Like I could see how it was affecting my friends in Shenyun. They were being targeted for being friends with someone like me. And then in my parents' case, I could see that more importantly, they felt deep shame about the fact that I was gay, that I was not going to marry a woman that they would have preferred me to marry, or and that they were uncomfortable even just like talking about it with my other extended relatives. And it would be very funny years later where I would tell my aunt, where I would tell my uncles and be like, I'm gay, I have a boyfriend. And they were all fine with it. The shame was totally, I think, internalized in the way that where it was because I was my parents' son, where I was specifically in this community and they felt that I represented them in some way, that they felt real shame. And maybe my uncles and aunts would have been homophobic if their own children had been queer, but um, I think that's how I began to inherit shame, where it wasn't something that was actually internal or natural to me. It was something that came to me from the people around me. And I think it was through my love of like reading and also I think because I'm 28 right now, I did grow up, I think, in a different generation than Gemma. Like I did have the privilege of eventually seeing more and more queer actors and queer representation on the screen that really destigmatized the thing, like all of this for me. And I can't imagine what I can't imagine what I would have been like or what kinds of how much more difficult it would have been for me to come out or to come into my own, I would say, if it had been even a decade or two earlier. And it's um and I think the frightening thing is that even as we are increasingly less invisible, that I think with the recent case that Tahil was talking about, is it Chiles versus Salazar?
Child
Um
Salazar, yeah.
yeah, that one.
Mhm.
And like it's still happening. Even with the increased visibility of queer people, conversion therapy in whether in like overtly institutionalized forms or in less overtly institutionalized forms, like within the family, within networks that we don't see that don't have names, it's still happening to this day. Um, and that's something that is really scary, how prolific I think the shame is.
Very powerful. I can relate to many of the things that you had said, and I think a lot of my shame was mostly mine, really. It was internalized for a long time. And I think there were little microaggressions around me, but not directed to me because no one really talked about gay, trans, or anything back then. It was just not talked about. And I grew up in a Catholic school, so we didn't talk about body parts or anything. And I'm an advocate of proponent of introducing, sexual education in schools early on, because if I had language for my body parts, I would have been able to signal my distress to my parents. No one talked about anything. And when you grow up Catholic, you're taught to not touch yourself or not touch anyone else, or and you're born and your sin. You're a sinful person. You're born into sin. So, there's this kind of looming type of culture that you're a part of that's telling you, regardless, you're sinful, and you do inherit that shame, right? But I think I took that in fully, and it took a lot of my own homophobia out on myself, in many ways. And you grow up with a culture of repression and secrecy and these types of things, and you're socialized as female, because I was female at birth, and you don't talk about things, you don't speak up, you know your place, and you fit neatly within that kind of construct. And so I think, I knew all along that there was something different about me, but I had no language for it. I had no point of reference. It was very lonely. And so because of that, I internalized a lot of um, negativity, and that came out later, in terms of me wanting to end my life, right? And we all have closets we need to come out of, right? Secrets that we keep because we're afraid that people won't love us if we tell them who we really are. And I see shame in the way my father has handled his alcoholism, and I feel like that cycle, of that shame, keeps us stuck in those patterns of repression and not wanting to step out of there. We stay stuck sometimes, and I feel like I was very much stuck in that way. I didn't turn to drugs or alcohol, thankfully, but I definitely deprived myself of joy, in certain ways, because I didn't feel I was entitled to it, you know. And I'm making up for that now, and I'm glad I'm still here. But and I feel no shame about anything, completely free of all that. But it took a long while to get here, and a few years ago, I was invited to Parliament Hill to speak the day that the legislation in Canada was introduced to ban conversion therapy, and it was a big moment. But again, I thought about all the people that we lost as a result of conversion therapy, and how many people didn't make it, and dedicated my speech to them, because we need to continue what we're doing, and one of the ways that we outlive our shame is through trying to carve out some sense of happiness and life for ourselves, and so I try to put that in perspective during the bad days, when I'm feeling so low, when I'm feeling defeated, or feeling like, oh, what does it all mean, or this kind of thing, because it's just really important that we keep going as best we can. And some days that can mean getting up and making the bed and making a cup of tea and just doing what you have to do, and other days that could mean going on a march and protesting in the middle of the street, or whatever it is, But in any case, getting up every day, that's certainly one way that we keep going on, and living for the moment, and for each other, and building community, and just building up ourselves. And so when I look in the mirror now, I don't have any shame in the same way that I did. I don't have any shame in that, I took a long while to get here to where I am, where the reflection isn't something I'm running away from, thankfully. um but that was a long construction, of building and rebuilding, unlearning and learning, and so it takes work, right, to be happy. It takes work to not go back to the familiar of those places where we can go with the negative self-talk and these types of things. And so, I have to be very gentle with myself and deliberate about how I choose to live each day.
It's wild because Gemma, Nathan, and I have, we come from different backgrounds, I don't come from a religious background per se. I always say at this point that my mom was haunted by her Baptist demons, and those demons came into the house and haunted us, I suppose. But we weren't raised in a religious home. On and off, we would go to church when I was little, up until about grade 2 or 3. But after that, like any good Canadian family, we just went to the cottage instead. You know, like we replaced church with going to our, you know, our summer home. And so for me, when I became religious, I became an evangelical in the summer between, well, high school, essentially the beginning of high school. Um, I really dove headlong into high control Christianity. I chose it for myself. I think in part I knew that it would appease my mom. Because she, even though she wasn't a devout or even you can even say practicing Christian, I knew that she thought it was a good thing, and so that was part of it. But I also think that the church offered me a cover. I think that the church, at least in my 14-year-old mind, I thought if I'm a Christian and I'm going to church, I can't be queer. And eventually I went to, so all through high school, I was involved in church, youth group, camp, like Bible camp. It was called Joy Bible Camp, in fact. And these different organizations and, ministries. But then I eventually went to Liberty University, which is Jerry Falwell's school. Those who know who Jerry Falwell is, you know what kind of school this is. Those who don't know who Jerry Falwell is, count your blessings. But I went down to Lynchburg, Virginia, and went through. I finished my undergrad there, and all 4 years I was doing my undergrad. I was in their conversion therapy program, and I always think about shame. The part of the question, or pardon me, the question was, how does shame factor into this all? I always think of shame as that which brought me into conversion therapy and that which brings most people who aren't forced into conversion therapy. And even for some folks who are forced, right, there is shame as well. But it certainly is the number one, motivator for why folks go into conversion therapy. And there actually is a Canadian study that backs this up. It's the number one cited, reason why people go into conversion therapy, but it's also the number one export of conversion therapy, right? This is really, conversion therapy amplifies shame. And I think for me, why I even went into the church, and then even more specifically, why I went into conversion therapy, was because I was ashamed of who I was and who I desired. It was made very clear throughout my childhood, not from my dad, which I think is a very different story than most folks. My dad was sort of this hippity dippity, pot smoking, Bob Dylan fan, owned a record store downtown Toronto. He was a cool guy. And then there was my mom, who, on the other hand, made very clear multiple times that it was not going to be okay to be gay and live under her roof. Things where she explicitly said, "I'm so glad that none of my kids are queer." And there were 5 of us. Little did she know her youngest child certainly was me. But then on top of that, I remember messaging that she communicated to me. She said, we were on our way to the cottage one weekend, and she said, she's like, "You realize it's Pride this weekend in Toronto?" And I said, no, like pretending I didn't know, but clearly I did. I said, no. And she said, "Yeah, isn't it disgusting what these guys do on these floats and all this?" And she had this imagery of what, queers do during Pride. And again, it was this constant messaging, this constant communication that it was not going to be okay or safe to be myself. And so that pushed me again, I think, into the church. And then once I was in the church, it was made very clear as well that heterosexuality wasn't just the ideal sexuality, it was the only possible sexuality, right? That if you were to identify as queer, well, then your salvation would be questioned. You, not only would your salvation be questioned, but you'd be pushed out of the church, or at this point I was at Liberty University, so the university, if you were to again act on your homosexuality. And so it was this impossible situation, that that I was in, that again I thought either I choose myself, which was considered a sinful, bad thing to do, or I choose God, which was the right thing to do. And of course, not only in the moment, but also for all of eternity. And so when you have the quote unquote choice between yourself and God, of course, God's going to take the cake, right? Like, of course, you're going to choose God as if, and then reject yourself, especially when, the fires of hell are quite close. And that's what you're being threatened with, right? And so I think about shame, I think it's in many ways imbued into Christian theology in a lot of ways, high control Christian theology, I should say more specifically, um, to such a point that, or to such an extent that you are made to believe that you can't be part of this system, be part of this faith tradition, if you are to, again, quote unquote, choose yourself. So for me, shame really was the motivating factor for why I went into conversion therapy and tried to change myself so that I could stay within the fold. But it was also the number one export, right? It was the number one consequence of going through these practices, that although I was made to believe that I was doing the right thing and I was on the right track and I was following Jesus the way that I ought to, when inevitably change didn't happen, I didn't think that God was the problem, because God's perfect within the evangelical imagination. And so if God's not the problem and God wants me to change, who's the problem? Me, right? I'm the problem. And when you see yourself as a problem, that's of course a problem. And so I think that this, all this to say is that shame is the glue that holds conversion therapy together. It's what brings people in and what keeps people there. And then it's what people take with them once they leave.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to me, especially as we're not dealing with just sort of one religious reality or experience in the room. Um, I am not a victim of any sort of internal conversion therapy in my home space, but I certainly do know where you can see the tools that can be used to affirm conversion therapy do arise, especially when there isn't an entire awareness or understanding of how religion is weaponized to be able to harm people, specifically LGBTQ people. I come to this as a Hindu and a Sikh. I was born into an interfaith family, and I was the only person to ever come out from in my family as someone that is not heterosexual or cisgender. I come to this as someone who um actually was affirmed by my faith traditions to come out as bisexual. Because I was allowed to have the opening and understanding that, like, oh, this whole thing about like just needing to be interested in the other sex or just needing to be interested in procreation is not just is just been something that's been imposed on me, and not something I just have to consciously choose because that's the only option that's there by a divine being that has created all things and that has made nothing impossible. Um, and it took a lot of learning outside of like my typical context to be able to, really see that I have a different way of being able to understand things. But it's very clear that when the intention is to show that things exist in a binary, it's either this or this. And if you don't make the conscious choice to make the right choice, then it's only a bad decision and bad results for you. Um, and I do kind of wonder what that means for you at this moment. Like, as people who may have experienced this at home because of a faith tradition or not, what is your current relationship with religion and spirituality? You don't have to give me a vanilla answer by any means, because if you have a complete distrust and like disinterest in being religious or spiritual, it's also completely valid. But I think it's important for people to folks who may watch this later to know that the relationship to religion and spirituality can also be a spectrum too, after having gone through such experiences. Um, and again, because I have not gone through the experience myself, I had a personal relationship that made me stronger in my faith traditions, but also more pluralistic. Whereas I know that many people, especially in the LGBTQ community, know what it means to feel ostracized and therefore want to stay away from religion and spirituality. So I'm kind of curious where your current relationships are with that part of your mind or that part of your understanding. And Lucas, I guess I'll start with you and then pass it to Gemma, then Nathan.
Deal. Um, I am no longer a person of faith. And you know what? It wasn't even my sexuality that pushed me to deconvert. I think, well, for me, it was my research on the Holocaust. Most of my past research was on the antecedents of the Holocaust, looking at how Christian theology laid the seedbed for the Holocaust, and then looking at the Holocaust, not so much the Holocaust itself. So I looked, later on at the intergenerational transmission of trauma between survivors, their kids, and their grandkids. Um,
Mm.
and so it was doing that research that really pushed me away from faith. I think that going to divinity school, which I did from 2013 2015, that div school certainly gave me the tools to reconsider my faith, but not necessarily give up my faith. I started
Mm.
to reconceptualize my understanding of God or the divine. But it wasn't until my PhD that I started to really question a lot of things. And for me, it was the question of theodicy, right? How do I reconcile a good God with, evil, the problem of evil? And that was really the straw that broke the camel's back and what pushed me away from my faith. But for me at this point, even though I'm not a person of faith, even though I'm, quite critical of a lot of faith traditions, it doesn't mean A, that I'm not interested in talking about these things, or B, that I'm not invested in communities that hold religious beliefs. In fact, I think back to div school, there was a professor in our div school. She was a Jewish scholar of the New Testament. And she came into class the first day and she says, I don't give two hoots if you're a Baptist, if you're a Presbyterian, if you're an agnostic, if you're whatever. She says, but by the end of this class, I hope that if you are a Baptist, you're a better Baptist. If you are a Presbyterian, you're a better Presbyterian. If you are agnostic, you're a better agnostic. And so for me today, I don't hold the same faith commitments that I once held, but I do believe that it's super important that through the work that I do, I hope that I'm able to, in any way possible, allow folks who are people of faith to do better, right? And specifically in regards to LGBTQ communities. Beyond that, of course, as well. But I do, my goal at this point is to make sure that whoever is a person of faith and who reads my work walks away from my work in a way that they feel, to use my Christianese that I once, spoke in, edified, that they are able to learn hopefully something. And so, although not a person of faith, these are certainly the conversations I trade in most often, and that I believe to be, in a lot of ways, the most important.
Yeah, that's a big question for me because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a priest. And of course, I was born female, so that wasn't an option. And I did consider going into an order, but for me, it was like transubstantiation or bust, like I could never reconcile the fact that my gender prohibited me from taking part in the Eucharist. I just was like, what is this? I wasn't buying it even back then. Um, so I decided not to go into an order and did pursue studying religion out of pure interest. And that was really helpful for me because I did comparative religions. So studying other traditions was really, really helpful in critiquing my own. Right. And you just get to see that they all take from each other and blah, blah, blah. And it's all not, it's like it's interesting when you put things side by side, you're able to look at them and critically reflect and and so I did actually consider, and I did join the United Church in my early 20s, as when I was still doing my undergrad. Um, but I had the same issues there. Strangely enough, the United Church as a whole is supportive about same-sex marriage, abortion, all kinds of different things on a national level here in Canada. But individual congregations at the time, before same-sex marriage was legal, and I was president of a gal at the time and involved with coordinating marriage coordinating couples who wanted to be public and court challenges and these types of things. This was like in the early 2000s, and I was in the media all the time. So I did join a United Church here in the city, but it was the most conservative United Church, and I had no idea. I just went there because a friend of mine sang in the choir, and I was like, yeah, I'll check it out. And anyway, I got involved like I always do, rolled up my sleeves. I was a youth minister there. I formed a youth group. I was on the church council. I was like on a bunch of committees. I was lay minister, and I spent 4 years there. And and they were trying to decide whether or not I should pursue ordination. But then, because I was in the media so much talking about same-sex marriage, the congregation got really threatened, and they wanted to have a vote and say, we're not having same-sex blessings. And it was ridiculous because it wasn't even legal at that point. But they did have a meeting, and it erupted into a big thing, and they were comparing it to bestiality and everything. It was a horrible experience. And I just decided after 4 years that I would leave. I couldn't handle it anymore. At the time I was pursuing well, I was thinking about getting married to my partner, and um we knew it would help other couples if we applied at all the United Churches, so they would all have to have these meetings. So we did. But the rejection was hard for me. We got all the letters back, and they were no, of course. One minister did take us through a church, and we felt like humans, but I was going to church every Sunday and saying prayers with these people, and some of them wouldn't even shake my hand or anything, or they were thinking I was going to abuse the children because I dressed, well, I was more like a butch lesbian back then, but because I didn't dress like a woman, they were just assuming that I was going to abuse the children. Like there was just all these things going on, and there were a lot of people there that were very lovely, but eventually I had to leave. Strangely enough, there were 6 kids in my youth group, and 3 of them eventually came out later and met me at different times and thanked me for being there. But and I was like, that's more than 10%. Maybe there is something to this conversion, maybe but I joke, but they're great kids, and I'm still in touch with them, and they're living great lives now. But anyway, from there, I wasn't involved with institutionalized religion at all. I just moved away from it altogether. I do feel like I'm more of a Gnostic Christian. I really identify with Christ as an advocate, like standing up for people who are vulnerable and speaking out against government, speaking out against the church, dying for what you believe in. That's certainly something that I feel like I've given up my life in so many ways for the various causes that I represent. I just met the Pope recently and formed a great relationship with him and his advisors, and that's for me is revising canon law to prevent predators from being moved from parish to parish. That's still happening. So I'm quite often back and forth at the Vatican, and I'm there, nerding out by all the texts and different things like that, and I've lectured at the Gregorian and all these types of things. But what I love most about going there is the disruption that I cause, not by doing anything, but just by being there, and people are forced to call me by my name, and they use my pronouns, and the Vatican press will cover our visits, and then it'll be it's always it's the disruption, right? It's a tiny crack, but it makes a difference. And next month, I've been invited now to go back and present on LGBT issues and feminism to the Pope's top advisors. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that we'll be having from there. So I do work with people who are still involved with the church, different levels, cardinals, bishops, Pope, um, scholars. So I do put myself in these, situations where they could be potentially triggering. I do a lot of work beyond that to be able to keep showing up there. But for the most part, I try not to lump everyone in with the institutions and remember people, and humanity first always. And for me, it's not so much whether I can sit down with people who don't agree with me. It's about, what can we find that we do agree on, and let's start from there. And so I get on with this with people fine, and I haven't had a negative experience in that regard going into these ancient buildings, which are quite fascinating. But at the same time, I don't agree with any of it. Like the contradictions, the hypocrisy, all of those things. I find it all just so troubling. Um, but at the same time, I know that people don't always arrive at the same place at the same time, and it was a journey for me as well. And I try not to judge anyone, but in order to do the work that I have to do, I always make room for everyone at my table because I know what it's like to feel turned away, and I just will never do that to another person. And I've been reflecting a lot about resurrection lately, actually, because, well, it was Easter recently, and the priest who abused me just died a few months ago, and it opened up all kinds of different things for me. And where I did name him, there was a lot of pageantry with his death, and that brought up a lot of feelings for me. And so I just took some time and reflected, and I posted about resurrection today, just from the standpoint of, the fact that I don't look at it in the way that I was taught anymore, but I just look at it as, resurrection is not becoming the wound, and I see so much cruelty and hatred, especially online now. Public life is saturated with it, and as an advocate, I'm constantly getting death threats. I'm constantly having to involve police, these types of things, and the easiest thing for me to do would be to be cruel, and get on social media and talk about all my feelings about this and that. And I even had, colleagues want to come down and protest the priest's funeral, but I just, I couldn't go there. Um, because at one point I did love him too, and I love the church, but I've had to leave all that behind me and love myself more. And so I do feel that we have it in us to hold all the complexities together. Um, and so I think that's the point I start from when I approach any kind of advocacy work. Um, so I don't have the same type of relationship, I think, with the church that I used to. I have a new one, which is cool because, when I was a kid and I wanted to be a priest, and had I followed that path, I wanted to be a theologian and all that. Had I followed that path, had I been born male and became a priest and became a theologian, I would never have met the Pope. I would never have, been invited to lecture or go to the university in Rome like I've been, or be involved in these discussions that, are really interesting to me on an intellectual level. So it's interesting how, life works out in some way. But yeah, I think in lots of ways, spirituality and ritual is very important for people. Routine, discipline, like just being somewhere in a monastery, studying and writing, and um, being part of a community. These types of things were always very important to me. But I've been able to do that in a wider community now, through advocacy, and I feel like advocacy is my ministry now.
Oh, I don't know how to follow up from that. That was really intense. That was, I mean, it's so cool that you're going to the Vatican and you're doing all this really important work to change things with the church, within the church, outside of the church. I don't even know the
All of it.
right said all of it. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
impressive.
Thank you. That's
Um,
pretty kind.
no, 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 that's it's really I'm not being kind. That's incredible. For me, I think I'm similar. I think maybe we're all similar, Lucas, Gemma, and I. We all have like a really deep respect for the church, for all sorts of different religions. I think God and any sort of narrative you might have about God, I think there's something really powerful and also hopeful, and it draws people together, I think, often in hopes of doing good. Um, and that's something that I'll always respect and be wary of at the same time. I think I mean very rec I write about God actually. I feel like a lot. Like I think it's something that I write about a lot in my fiction. I recently I watched Silence last year by Martin Scorsese, and I read the book by Shusaku Endo very recently, and then I read Saramago's The Gospel According to Jesus Christ. I don't know why I listed those books. I just felt like I threw a bunch of random names at people. But it's
That's
God
good.
has been on my mind, is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say. And it is um and so even though I don't think I think I would identify as agnostic at this point, or that if I do believe in a God, it's a very sort of non-interventionist, not necessarily not necessarily someone I'm comfortable putting lots of adjectives on or trying to describe in a specific way. I think as I think I'm more comfortable with a God that's sort of nondescript in that way, and thinking about when I think about the diversity of religions and the diversity of, I think, the divinities that people worship or come to for hope, for to pray to or whatever, there is a there is in my mind like the sense of utter distinctness of like as there almost in the way that there's as many gods as there are different people and they all I sound so high right now. I swear I'm not high. Um and that even if many of them call God by a similar name, I think there's different kinds. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it seems to me that we should all be able to come to the table together and no matter what our beliefs are, to try and make this place that we call Earth, better for everyone, especially the most vulnerable people in our communities, and to really reckon with, I think, the power that we have and to use it responsibly, and to also really respect the fact that everyone is so utterly different. Um, Especially, I think, younger folks, queer people, and also adults who are still, figuring their way out in life, and to give them the space and the time to know what they want and to learn what they want. Um, I think that's kind of, I don't know, when I think about God, I think a lot about, weirdly enough, I think about power. Yeah, and how to be really thoughtful and considerate um with that and what that means. Anyway, very vague. Again, I'm not high, I promise. I feel like the more I say it, the more you don't believe me. It's fine.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Not one bit. I think there's I Nathan, I think what you're getting across is going to be different from what Gemma reflected on versus what Lucas reflected on. But I think that's kind of the reason why I asked the question. Because I didn't want to assume that everyone has the same reaction or the same response going forward with that ongoing relationship. Um, to imagine going from being so afflicted, being so attacked by your own community, to then doing that kind of advocacy at an international level like Gemma does, or to doing that writing for the anthology itself or anything like that is for a lot of people it's probably unimaginable because they are probably still reveling from the realities of what they've experienced and don't know what to do with themselves. And I think with you you Nathan, explicitly talking about finding more reasons to write, more reasons to be able to put thoughts on paper for fiction or nonfiction purposes, I think is really important to remind people that like the the vessel in which you are able to express yourself is so valuable at a time where we know that our voices across the community are being suppressed. And to be able to speak that truth to power creatively, politically, religiously, theologically, however we feel like makes the most sense, I think is all the more reason why your response is just as valid. Um, and this is making me want to ask like thousands of questions now, but I don't think that's necessarily fair to all of the folks who have been patiently and quietly listening because I forced them to not open their mic. So I'm going to actually give this opportunity to folks to ask questions in the chat, unless they would like to raise their hand and ask any questions as well. We want to open the floor to any of the folks that are here who may be curious and may want to ask something in particular. I will take facilitator's privilege and ask the last question because I have one in mind. But I do want to open it up to other folks in the space who maybe are interested in asking a question. If you go to the React section, you should be able to see the place where you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. It says React with a heart on it. You just have to click on that to raise your hand. If you're on your phone, you should have something similar at the three dots to be able to raise your hand and ask a question. I'm curious if in the meantime, as people may be thinking about their questions, writing them, do either of you have a question for each other?
Not me. I don't
I
know.
have a very casual question, if I may. This is towards to Gemma.
Yeah.
How have you is the Pope a fun guy?
Um, I like him. I really do. I mean, I don't agree
Hmm.
with everything that he's saying right now because, but I know what he's up against, and I know that he's trying to unite a divided church, and many people, particularly bishops and cardinals in the U.S., voted for Trump, right? So, he's trying to bring everyone into the fold, and that's a tough thing to do. But we
Do
all
you
have that
know?
common enemy in Trump,
Yeah,
But he's lovely, he's funny, very
yeah.
empathetic, not performative at all, and intellectual. Um, and I like him, kind of know him a bit, and you know, I feel like, well, the first time I met him, I handed him a Newfoundland flag that was given to me by a woman who had brothers in a notorious orphanage here, which it's called Mount Cashel, and it was one of the most horrendous cases in the country. And anyway, she lost a couple of her brothers to grief, and it was tragic, really. And when I finished my walk across Newfoundland in July 2015, she gave me that flag and told me I walked home to her, and that was about, I don't know, 10 or 11 years ago, and I was determined to get that flag to a pope. So I was able to present that to him when I met him and told him the story behind the flag and about the woman and her brothers and about all of us here and all over, and anyway, he cradled the flag and held it as if it were like a heart and welled up, and that really touched my heart. And basically, how I approached that meeting was that I said to him, "Look, the world is so polarized now. The most radical thing any of us can do is sit down and have a conversation." And then at that point, he just we were just buds after that. But yeah, he does have a sense of humor, and I don't know about fun for describing
Don't worry about it.
anyone at the Vatican in their capacities, especially when they're being official. But it's not a word I would use. But there's definitely a lot of endearing qualities about him, which have warmed me to him. Sure.
That's really
And I like
cool.
to, I'm a nerd, right? So it's cool to be able to debate stuff and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I love flipping their religious script on those guys. So
Okay. So you don't need to confirm or deny this, but it sounds like he was a Kamala voter. I'm gonna
he
keep
was
that
a
in
what?
mind. He was a Kamala voter. He voted for
Oh,
Kamala.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how he voted, but he,
No, no, no. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
oh,
Don't
okay,
worry
gotcha.
about
But
it.
I,
That's
I
a
would
joke.
assume,
That's a
I
joke.
mean, yeah, 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 yeah. No, no, for sure. I don't know how he voted, but I mean, who wouldn't vote for her? I mean, come on.
Well,
Um,
you can't as a Canadian, but
no,
it's
I
all
know I
good.
can't, but yeah. But anyway,
Um, I see
this
the
guy.
first question in the chat, so I guess we can transition to that.
Sure,
This
sure, Nate.
is,
I appreciate it. Um, do you want to read it?
oh, no, 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 that's your job.
So the first question that's come in from Kevin, who's a student at Miami University, they ask, what does healing from trauma look like in your opinions? And what can a person do to heal? Mentioned in quotations because obviously there's no one right answer or one answer.
I could start just because I just got warmed up there, but it's not an easy answer, and there's no easy formula. And I don't think I will ever heal. I think it's reconciling that the wounds will always be there, but it's what we do with those wounds. So for me, part of my process has been turning it into something positive. But then again, some days it's like, the same hands turning over what feels like healing and then what sometimes feels like more harm. so I had to balance that out and practice a lot of self-care myself. But I think I got to a point where, when I was younger, especially, I was trying to push things down, and now I just invite all my demons over for tea because it's a part of me, right? And you can't push that kind of thing away. You just learn to live with it the best way that you can with whatever tools that you have been able to take along the way in order to survive. And for me, you know, even expressing empathy for the priest or having my humanity not taken away by acknowledging that I can be okay with people having their grief for him as well as what I'm feeling, and that to me feels like, as much as he's taken, as much as the institution has taken from me, um, that they haven't taken that, and I think I've done a lot of talk therapy over the years. I do other things like I write, obviously, and I'm a cold water swimmer, so I swim all year round in the wintertime as well. I go in the water with my trunks on. I'm constantly trying to be gentle with myself and practice self-care and these types of things. But again, I grew up in a home where, I always had to pivot, right? And I think endurance is, not a machine I polish for display. It's something that's moved me through a lot of things in my life. But I realized since the priest died that I've been only visiting grief. I haven't been staying there long enough in the ways that I needed. So I think healing is a journey. It's a lifelong journey, and and it's just something I've had to reconcile that will always be a part of me, but it doesn't have to define me. What happened.
Yeah, if I may quickly touch on this question too, I mean, in short, I would say healing for me is just, it was a lot of non-conversion therapy. It was a lot of normal talk therapy. Um, but I also think that in terms of like when I think about healing a lot, I think of it too as like it should really be a responsibility that a society takes up. There's only so much I think the individual can do in terms of healing, if even that. And that requires great systemic change so that this kind of healing doesn't need to continue happening because that harm isn't being perpetuated anymore. So that's something that I try to keep in my mind too. At least for me, when I think about healing, it means like trying to engage, trying to provoke or spark that larger systemic changes, whether that's in the court of law, whether that's in publications like the anthology, things that really spark like a movement. As I think, hopefully, I think all three of us are, and maybe Tahil too. I guess Tahil is, yeah, that we're all trying to do is like we're trying to leverage communities, trying to leverage lots of people to make change.
When I think about trauma, um, I think about how oftentimes when something happens to us that is traumatic, that moment, that experience exceeds our ability, our mind's ability to really register it in the way that we register other moments. Right. When we're walking down the street and everything's normal, you can sort of take everything in and everything sort of you remember it. Whereas when something really horrible happens, whether it be a death or you witness, something really violent happen or something really violent happens to you, oftentimes the moment's so intense, it's so overwhelming that you can't necessarily take it all in, or you at least you might in some ways there might be some sort of impression on you, but it doesn't necessarily register the way that it would otherwise. And so I think a big problem with trauma is that we try to, work through something. We try to come to terms with something that really left us reeling, it exceeded our mind's capacity to really, again, have a narrative around what happened. And so a big part of trauma work and trying to, come to terms with trauma is finding a narrative, finding a way of communicating what happened. And the phrase for me that always is most significant is the phrase of coming to terms, right? When you come to terms with something, you are in a very, real sense coming to terms, coming to language, finding terms or language to describe what happened. And I think back to my theological training with, there's a German theologian, Dorothy Sohle, and she talks about how it's a radical act just to name what is. And for trauma survivors, this really is a radical act, right? For you to put into language what happened that really, in a lot of ways, was so overwhelming that it really was hard to ever have a narrative around what you experienced. And so I think when you come to terms, you find language, you are mastering that experience in language in some way, shape, or form, right? There's a lot of chaos that happens inside of us that we externalize and put on to paper or just talk to someone and let them in some ways be our paper, that we write our stories. And when we do that, we are at least edging closer to finding, coming to terms with what happened in the more figurative sense. And I think what Gemma said, right, it's this lifetime journey. And it is, right? You're not going to, after all of a sudden, coming to terms with, actually finding a story or a narrative to describe what happened to you, all of a sudden, boom, you're better. It's not how it works. But you move forward with it. You don't move past it, but you do move forward with it. And I think that forward motion is super important. So for me, I think that writing has been a really defining way that I've been able to come to terms with what happened to me in the past. I also think, Nathan had talked about therapy, going to real therapy after going to quote unquote therapy, right? Is super helpful. But again, that's another way of externalizing what happened to you, whether it be on the page, whether it be with a therapist, whether it be with just a community. And there is research to suggest that for conversion therapists specifically, the number one way that conversion therapists identify that they've been able to come to terms with their experiences has been through having a community. And it doesn't necessarily mean a queer community. Though the second cited way is finding a queer community. So that's, obviously quite helpful as well. But finding a community that doesn't question you, that accepts you and your narrative, your story and what happened to you, your truth, is super important, right? When someone doesn't believe what we say, that's part of the re-traumatizing experience, right? Not having the words or the story that we present as, to be accepted. And so for me, I think, writing really has been helpful. I'm like a chatty Cathy, so just talking in general, it's quite having someone again who listens. I think is the other part of that puzzle. To not just speak into the void, but have someone receive it, someone hear it, someone listen, and that's been really generative and life giving.
I see the questions are coming in, and I'm like, I don't think I'll ever see you people again. I mean, it'd be nice if I do, but do we want to try like answering the rest of the questions like one sentence each or something? Like that way we get to everyone.
Yeah, if each of you wants to take a look at the questions, answer what you feel like you can, or what you'd like to address directly, I think that would be great. Juliana and Sean, thank you so much for asking those questions. One thing that I would like to answer, meanwhile, if you want to ponder the questions a little bit, so I'll just give you some time. Um, One thing that I want to say to Sean in particular is, as you're thinking about writing about something related to white Christian nationalism, trying to figure out if you can separate Christianity from the harm it perpetuates. I think this is a really key thing about um what ultimately becomes the role of identity and self and the role of community and theology as it develops into something political or as it develops into something that can be weaponized. I think it's really important for you to think about how, if we're thinking about conversion practices, it's very important to consider that the limitations on Christian history, as a specific example, are not just limited to cisgender people. There are elements of Christianity that have been influenced by LGBTQ individuals and community. It's very important to consider that there isn't a single monolithic definition of how Christianity shows up in the world, let alone any other religion. So it is important to consider how that might be separated from something like queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and any of the other phobias that exist. But more importantly, your framing actually should not be around blank phobia. because we want to be clear about something in what we've learned from this conversation today. This isn't about fear of LGBTQ people. This is not similar to being scared of spiders or drowning or heights or closed spaces. There is an intentionality to weaponize religion to actually cause harm. It is not just fear. And I think there's a very important distinction on how fuel fears the desire to be violent against LGBTQ people. So I think your framing should not be around a phobia like queer phobia or any other phobias that I've mentioned, but it should be framed around the intentionality of trying to attack communities that don't follow a sexual or gender binary. We want to be very clear about that because we don't want to simplify the realities of what LGBTQ people experience. And it's just as important to consider that an evolution of the terminology that we use is going to make a big difference in how you get your point across about your thesis. Um, Being able to separate religion from a lot of things is very hard because religion, culture, society, politics, power, economy, those are separate things and they occur at the same time and impact each other. So the question ends up becoming, how do you actually navigate the ways that religion can be used to impact those other things and vice versa? And maybe that might be able to help you think a little bit about how you want to form your thesis accordingly.
Yeah, I think if I may follow up, I think something I think about too is like, for instance, if you think about the missionaries in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, how they were often probably the first part of like a colonizing effort in all of Asia as well. So there is, I think like there, and so all of, as Tahil very astutely said, like it's all mixed together, these political, the sociological, the colonial, and also the queer, not queer phobic, the queer hatred, ha 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 ha. Um, but all of that combined. Um, I think the next question is, how do I prove to a skeptical Christian, to skeptical Christian readers that the church needs to do something? Oh, wow. Actually, I don't know that that's a question for me.
I I'm just adjusting to having three kind of things going on in one in my lenses because I'm ancient these days, and so I have three. So I can't really read. I'm still adjusting to the vision aspect bifocal thing, so I can't really read the questions very well. Um, I looked down through them, but I there's a lot, so I didn't want to make an attempt there. So if there's a question there that you'd like to direct to myself or anyone else, that's fine.
I see some of the other questions though. I think they're all from Juliana. Um, about folks who want to seek change from a licensed therapist, especially if they're an adult in certain relationships, who want to, I think it says here, save their relationship or want to remain faithful to a conservative belief of sexuality. Um, I think part of the struggle, or at least with this particular, the context of these questions, I would say, is that um, I think, at least for me personally, right, my thoughts, if you want my 2 cents, um, is that ultimately the folks need to be honest with themselves about what they want, and what their heart desires. Um, and that it's very, I think, um, you put yourself in a really tricky situation where if you know you're of a certain sexuality, but you want something that doesn't make sense for your sexuality. Um, and I think it would fly against the face of science to try to go to conversion therapy and to have that and in hopes of that changing your sexuality or making it possible for you to live a lifestyle, is that even the right word? To engage in a relationship that simply isn't possible for you, given the circumstances of your of who you are as a person. Um, and so it would be, and I say this in the gentlest way possible that I know of, which is to say, like, that it might be helpful to entertain possibilities outside of a conversion therapist and to be open to a different a way of being, a different way of moving through things. And I also think that in a relationship specifically is that it doesn't consist of just one person, it consists of, obviously, sorry to make this obvious point, but it consists of two people. And the other person also, I think, deserves to be with someone who is able to love them in the way that they need. Um, so that's at least those are my light thoughts on someone who is seeking an adult specifically, which I think is very different from a child or an adolescent or someone in a much more vulnerable position, perhaps. Um, someone who's using their own agency, if I can even call it that, using their own agency to seek out a quote unquote conversion therapist. Basically, I don't recommend it. It's a bad idea.
I'll try that question as well. This idea, what are our thoughts about folks who want to seek change from a licensed therapist? I think even the question, the verb to want, what does it mean to want your own erasure? What does it mean to scrub a constitutive part of who you are? I don't think people want this. I think people are made to want this. People are made to believe that they have to do this, right? That it's not that I ever woke up one day and was like, oh, I want to change this part of myself. No, I was made to believe that I needed to change. And so I think, when we're thinking about people who are quote unquote wanting to change or wanting to seek change, I think a different way of saying this is, they want to seek change by way of abuse because conversion therapy is definitional abuse. And so if I were ever to say and to replace conversion therapy with just abuse, because that's exactly what it is, according to all academic standards and professional standards and survivor standards, right? To say that, oh, we should be able to change by way of abuse, of course, that sounds ridiculous. And it is ridiculous, right? To ever say that I want to change myself by being abused. But that's the same thing as saying I want to change myself by going into conversion therapy. Because again, conversion therapy is definitional abuse. According to the UN Rapporteur on Torture, conversion therapy in certain instances is torture. So what does it say? Oh, I want to change who I am by way of torture. That doesn't compute. That doesn't make sense. And so I think when we use the appropriate language, right? I think some other Julia, you were talking about using appropriate language, not homophobia, but using other terms. I think this is a way of reframing the conversation in a way that it ought to be reframed. That when we name conversion therapy for what it is, abuse, and in some cases torture, all of a sudden, if we are to say, oh, I should be able to consent to this, I should be able to choose this, it again just highlights how ridiculous anyone's desire, quote unquote, to choose conversion therapy is. Conversion therapy is abuse. Conversion therapy, in many cases, is torture. Therefore, no one should ever have the ability to consent to this. Again, I think again, I'm saying the same thing, but really, I think the question, when we turn it around and sort of reframe it, we show the absurdity of people who quote unquote want this.
I I think I mean I don't know when this ends actually, which is maybe I shouldn't have said that. But also I think it is oh I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Um you know what? It'll come back to me if it's important, but if it's not, that's fine. I think Lucas put it very well.
Agreed. And no worries, Nathan. I was gonna say I think we've gone plenty beyond time, not for any lack of not wanting to answer questions. I think it was really important for you all to engage the ways that you did. Which is why I think I will sort of ask for us to end on the question that I wanted to ask. Um, with the permission of the audience as well. seeing that the future of conversations on conversion therapy are still going to be very prominent. There will be people who may see this video in the future, um, who may be navigating these concerns at home, who may not know how to have the conversations that they want to have for their safety, or who may feel uncertain about their sexuality and their gender because they're being told to be convinced of otherwise. If there's anything you could say to that person in a minute, what would you tell them or what would you advise them to do to remind them of how important and valuable they are?
Wants to take that one? Luke, maybe? I don't know.
It's a very big question there to heal.
Mm.
No, I I wish, and this is maybe a different, I'm not necessarily answering the question, but I'll reframe it and then try my best after that with under a minute to answer the question. I wish someone had have come up to me when I was a teenager and said, Luke, I know you're gay and I love you. That's it. Because I think a lot of the time, those who are within religious systems live with the delusion that they can't be gay, and that that they are just struggling with same-sex attraction, that they're just fighting this temptation, whatever, however they frame it. I wish someone had just spoken truth into my life and said, "Hey, I know you're gay, love you." Like that's it. And I think that for those out there who know that they are queer, but are framing it as, because deep down we know who we are, I think, in a lot of ways. I'm obviously, for some folks it's a journey and we figured out over time, but I think for a lot of other folks, we've known since we were quite young who we are. And for me, I did know I was the way that I am. And thank goodness I am the way that I am. I'm very thankful for my, what I think is a gift, uh, to be queer. I think that had someone just affirmed that, not just affirmed that, but recognized it, the recognition of it itself is huge. So to recognize it, then to affirm it, that would be cool. That would have been amazing. That would have been a game changer. I didn't have that. But for anyone out there, you're God. If you believe in God and God's the reason why you're, going to conversion therapy or thinking about it, God's bigger than that. And I have a number of resources I'd be more than happy to suggest, reading wise. But otherwise, you're loved. Your God's bigger than this quote unquote problem. And that's not a problem. It's the people who made this into a problem are the problem.
I think for me, I would say to that person that um, I totally agree with Lucas. I want to second that. Like God's bigger than your sexuality. God's so much more than that. God's bigger than your gender and all of that. Um, if that's the sort of theological reasoning that um, is important to you. But I think for me, when I think about someone who's younger than me too, or a younger version of myself, it would be that there's a different life out there for you. There's a whole other world that you haven't seen yet, and that you're still young, and there's so much life ahead of you, and that you deserve happiness in your body and in the community that you find, and all sorts of positive change really can happen if you give it time, if you're willing, if you um, really follow your heart, you will find the thing that you need, which is I think happiness and more to to keep living. Yeah.
I think that's sums everything up perfectly. I don't think I need to add anything except to say how grateful I am to be a part of this panel, and how wonderful to hear from Luke and Nathan, and to make new friends. As I said in the beginning, I just feel so filled up right now with Nathan's words, and I just happy to be here, and thank you.
Thank you to each of you, Lucas, Nathan, Gemma. It means so, so much to be able um, to get you to be in the space with us, to share with us these really valuable, perspectives, and to remind people in the room that like the possibilities to advocate for dignity are endless. Um, the work keeps going to be able to work against systems and communities and practices that make people not feel like they can be entirely who they are. And there's a reason why each of us does that work in different ways, and why we call on each of you to think about how you can contribute to the work of this movement. It's so important for us to see how we can stay involved and stay connected as this work continues to build, especially as there won't be a shortage of anti-LGBTQ laws trying to be passed in countries like the United States or Canada, or quite frankly, in a lot of places around the world. So it is really up to each of us to be able to see what role we can play to build on that movement. Um, just to confirm with the last question that I'm seeing in the chat, yes, there will be a recording made available, and we'll be sure to forward it to all of our registrants for this call. I do want to also make sure that I share that as a part of the work that I do at the task force, and as a part of my work that I do at the Interfaith Center, a lot of what we do is virtual because we want to engage these conversations with frequency, with intersectionality, and we do it unapologetically. So we are asking people to make sure to stay in touch with us, but to register for one of our upcoming events that's related to the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. If you all don't know that June 12th is the 10th anniversary of the shooting, this shooting, for those who don't know, that happened at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, happened 10 years ago. Um, and we are trying to have renewed conversations about what it's meant since then for the LGBTQ movement to fight for its rights, for its dignity, and for its safety, while also thinking about the ways that we could be better partnering with faith communities so that they are more aware of how they need to do the work, and how we can be more intentional um, in our cross solidarity partnerships that we need to be building going forward. So I've put a link in the chat for those who are interested to be a part of that conversation. It's happening on June 9th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. We are going to be doing a lot more of these kinds of conversations going forward, both at the task force and at the Interfaith Center. So please please keep updated with the newsletters and the emails that we send out. We look forward to having you as a part of these conversations in the future. Lucas, Nathan, Gemma, thank you three so much for your insight, for your wisdom, and for your willingness to be this candid in such an important time to have this conversation. And I certainly look forward to working with each of you and finding ways that we can get more people to hear your stories.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you
in
all
touch.
so much.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Cheers.
everybody.